Alright, I'm going to show you how to create custom assets for your asset bundle here. And I've already created one here, so I'm going to create a new one. So we're going to hit new. We have to type in the name of the project. I'm just going to call it example. We're just going to drop there. You could set this to 2D. Defaults for the texture assets are better if you use 3D, so we're going to use 3D. There's the add asset package. We're going to ignore that. Create project. This takes a second. This stuff appears on my other monitor, so you won't see it show up automatically here. But all right, here we go. Now, an important thing is the version of Unity that you need. You need this version of Unity specifically. Otherwise, the asset bundles will not be compatible with the game. Anyways, so we got our basic project here. And we got nothing here, obviously, so we're going to have to, first thing we have to do is enable the menu option for building asset bundles. Now to do that, you can use the existing file here. This is what you have to create to enable the menu option. I already did it, so you can go ahead and use this one. So we're going to right click, copy. And now I'm gonna go to our project folder here and let me open it up real quick. Should be right here. There it is. Alright, here it is. This is what it looks like on a blank package. Editor project, that is. I'm gonna go to assets, and the editor folder won't exist, so you're gonna have to create it. Editor, and then paste. And there you go. And as soon as you add it, it should automatically compile it and add it to the menu. Assuming there's no errors, it should show up here as build asset bundles. But you can't build anything yet because we haven't defined an asset bundle. So first, we're going to create some folders. We're going to create a folder. I'm going to call this custom asset bundle, custom prefab. This is the folder you can put your prefabs in, the game objects, that is. That's what the Unity editor calls it. Your game objects will go here, and then you'll create another folder. Call this custom textures, and this is where you'll put your textures. Now for assets, for prefab assets, I'll show that later. First, we need to set up an asset bundle. So we're going to create new. Now this is the important part. This is where you set the name of your asset bundle. So we're going to call it example asset bundle. And then you just call it that, and then you assign it to a folder. And since you created a new one there, it's already assigned to the folder you have selected here. And then you go over to custom textures, and then you select it in the right click menu. Well, not right click, you left click it, and then you hit that. You can assign different asset bundles to specific assets inside these folders, but it's just much easier just to assign the entire folder to your asset bundle, so that every time you create a new prefab or texture, you don't have to go in and assign it to your asset bundle. If you assign these folders, the important thing is you can't select your folder. If you select your folder here and do it, it won't work. You have to actually go and click the folder in the big view to set the asset bundle to that folder. So that's another important thing you have to remember to do. Anyway, and now we got the folders created. So now we're going to create a prefab. Now to do that, we create empty. Create empty. Create empty, and then you name your prefab example object. This name is case sensitive, by the way. So when you go to load it in your code, you have to use the exact same case that you used here. At least with textures, anyways. But not sure about I always use the same case to be on the safe side. Now, sometimes the editor will create it will add the asset in the scene and give it a weird position here. And if If it does, you have to set this to 0. Unless there's a specific reason you want a specific position here, but you usually don't. So for the main object, you always have to have this set to 0. And then if you want to create a child object, you have to make sure the asset is selected. And then you click on game object, create empty child. Then you can give this name. You can make an example child. And then you can give it a position like 0.2, 0.5, and that defines its position relative to the parent object. This is referred to as local position in the game's code, by the way. And once you create a prefab, it's almost ready to go. Now you just got to click the parent object like this, and then you go over here and drag it into your prefabs folder like that. And once you have it in your it should show up in your it should show up here. Once you have that prefab, it's ready to go. And now, so that takes care of the prefab. That's how you set up a basic prefab. Now, there's other things you can do, like add components, but you can't. You can only really add built Unity included components that come with the Unity engine that this game shipped with. So things like mesh renderer, mesh filter, text mesh, I guess. I don't think the game uses those. Mesh renderer and mesh filter are automatically added to an object when you go to add a sprite, so you don't have to add these. And then there's some more advanced stuff like let's see here. Where is it? Physics? No, that can't be it. Rendering, yes. Here. Light. You can add a light. If you want to add light to your object, you can create sort of like a light source. But this is usually assigned to child objects. I would recommend adding these to a child object so you can offset it relative to your parent object. So that's where you should put it. So I'm just going to go ahead and move that. But usually you don't. Usually, most of the time, you're going to be adding components in your code and not in the editor. This is just creating the game objects that you can load in later and modify in your code. And that takes care of the game objects, so we're going to go over textures. Now, this is another thing that's important to get right, because if you don't set some properties correctly here, it's going to create some really bad stuff, like missized, blurry sprites, or sprites that are the wrong size. Yeah, all sorts of things. So you got to make sure you got to get that correct. Find my project here. So I'm going to use this texture as an example. I always forget where these folders are. Oh, I guess I moved it off my window here. We go to custom shader. We go to paste. We got a PNG. I think it'll accept bitmaps and JPEGs, but I would recommend PNG since they support alpha layers. You could use TGA, maybe. I've only really used PNGs. The same files that modders have been using for a while work just fine with Unity Editor. It does, as long as it doesn't use any kind of excessive amount of compression. If it's a lossless format, is what I would recommend. So let's see. This is the example texture. This is the logo for my mod. This is where I store my asset bundle as well. These PNGs get converted into texture 2D assets when you build the asset bundle. So the source format doesn't really matter as long as you're not compromising the quality of your image. And it's something that the editor will recognize as a source file. Anyways, we got our texture added here. It should show up here, and then here it is. As you can see, it resized it to 512 by 128. The source file is never changed by the editor, by the way. Anything you do here will not affect the source file. Anything you edit here will only affect the file that ends up in your asset bundle. So if you built your asset bundle as is right now, this would be all stretched out because it's resizing it to a power of 2, because the default settings enables compression, and it looks like they use this sort of DDS type file format here, and compression always requires a power of 2 resolution, which is what this is set to. So we're going to disable compression because I don't think any of the texture assets in Gungeon uses that, and you'll inevitably get compression artifacts if you try to enable this. So we're not going to use it. We're going to use no filter mode. We're going to use point filter, no filter on that, because that'll just make things blurry. Then we're going to disable maps, and we're going to set this to none. That's what's causing the size to get changed. Then you're going to enable the read-write checkbox, because if you don't do that, certain code that you run, if it tries to modify any copy, even a copy of this asset, if you copy the asset somewhere and you try to modify it, it'll raise an exception if you do not have this enabled. So make sure you enable that. Just by default, just enable it everywhere. There's no harm in doing that. Then this side, I'm really not sure. You don't technically need to check this, but I always do it by default, just in case you need to. And now, as you can see, it's the original format. This is the resolution will end up as in-game, and this is, you don't have to use Power by 2 resolutions. The Gungeon's not too worried about that. Yeah, the texture shape should be 2D, the texture type should be default. And that should take care of basic textures, and more advanced stuff like normal maps and stuff I'm not very familiar with, so I'm not going to cover those. This just covers how you would add all your textures, your basic sprite textures and stuff into your asset bundle. Now there's more advanced things you can do, like you can create subfolders. Example subfolder. And you can create a copy of this. Let's create a copy of this as an example. This is easier to do in Windows Explorer than in the editor, so I'll do it in the editor. In Windows Explorer, I mean, I'll paste a copy here. Now you can have an asset with the same name in a subfolder, but I would not recommend doing that because you have to actually specify the full path and the extension of the asset when you go to load it in your code. And the extension is not going to be PNG. It's going to be .tex, I think, for texture 2Ds. For prefabs, they're going to be .prefab. So you have to refer to the full path, assets, custom prefabs, and then the exact name, including extension, to that prefab if it has a similar name to the same name to it as another prefab that's in your asset bundle. So as long as you use unique file names on everything, you don't have to worry about that, because if they have unique file names, you don't have to specify the path to it when you go to load it in your code. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind. Now, this rule does not apply to child objects. Child objects can have similar names as long as they're unique per parent object. So you can't have two example childs in the same parent object. You should have two different ones. So if you have more than one child, you have to give it a different name. I don't even think it'll let me. Let's see what happens if I try. Yeah, it won't let me. Well, actually, I parented to the wrong one. Oops, that's my mistake. You gotta make sure you got the correct object selected before you hit that create empty. Now, I guess it will, but it won't really, I'm not really sure how you would load that if it's the same name, so don't. There. So if you have two of these, like example object 2, this prefab can have childs with the same name as these, because these aren't linked. You can't access them in the code. You have to, not directly, you have to load them from their parents, and these parents are unique. As long as the parents are unique, these child objects don't have to be unique from other child objects on different parents. That part you don't have to worry about, because if you're creating like two custom chest objects, like what I've been doing, there are certain child objects you have to set up on them. Like, see here, ground hit is the name. I guess they technically don't have to be called this, but that's what I call them based on what existing assets used. This is how you load a child object, by the way. Once you have your object reference set up in your asset bundle, you load it in your code. I'll show you where you do that. Now, this is a cactus, an unrelated object to my chest, but the example stands. This is my asset bundle. I set up a reference to it earlier in this code. Then game object, you load asset game object, then the name of your object. This is case sensitive in some cases. With item APIs, texture related stuff for building sprites, you need to keep the same case, because the name of the texture 2D asset has to match what the what load asset has here. Because I recall someone had some weird null reference errors when you didn't have a matching case here. So this probably is case sensitive. And when you load it here like you would any vanilla official asset, that's the great thing about having a custom asset bundle is you load it the same way you would the existing assets in the game. Now, when you want to set up your asset, once you have your prefab built in the editor and you got it set up, you create a static field, you assign it to something. Let's see, where's my chest here? It should be at the bottom. A parachute. Chest west. I got a static field in my class for that chest. So if I go down here, you'll see where I created it. I assign that blank prefab, and then I build all the components. This is where I add the components and set it up. Now, unlike the old fake prefab system, is what they called it, is where the way that worked is you disable the object and then you have to add it to a special list and then setting the property don't destroy on load so it doesn't get removed when you load a new floor. All that stuff is only required when you create a new object in code, because anytime you create a new game object in code, it exists in the world, no matter what, and that has some limitations. But you get around that by using an asset bundle, because when you load up an object from an asset bundle, it does not exist in the world. It doesn't get copied. You're loading that reference directly. And so you can set up your components directly to that reference. You don't have to disable it or worry about any components activating their code prematurely or anything like that. And that's what's great about setting up a custom asset bundle here. All right. We covered the Unity editor side of things, so we're going to cover the code side of things. So to set up your asset bundle in your mod, you want to have this code somewhere in your mod. Now, this stuff right here is optional. This is just code that I use to have easy access to my asset bundle as well as these other existing asset bundles, so I don't have to constantly create references to them. Anyways, the important part is this: you have to run this function here, and which loads the this list. The internal list the game stores for its vanilla original asset bundles. You have to add your asset bundle to that list, and this is how that code does it. And then this code here loads your asset bundle. This is the name you give it for your asset bundle. This has to match the name of your asset bundle. And this loads it in either from this code's flexible enough now that it'll load it from your mod zip file if the end user has your mod as a zip file, and it'll also work with mods that have their contents in a folder instead. So anyway, you get this set up. This will load your custom asset bundle, and then that ends up here. I call it here in my main mod right here. And then this is how you would access your asset bundle once you have that set up. And you load it just like you would any other asset bundle in the game. And then once you do that, you can see this is an example. This is an object I've been working on. This is a custom treasure chest. And the way I access the initial prefab that I created for it, chest west, I'll show it to you in my project here. This is my project for my mod here. See, I got quite a bit of stuff in here. My chest is this object right here. Yeah, chest west. That's it. The treasure chest. Yeah, child objects like the very special spawn effects that have to be disabled because treasure chests decided to be different for some reason. Anyways, and that's where it is, my editor project. Anyways, and see the name here. The name that you see here matches what you load here. Expand the name of your asset bundle to your load asset, just like you would an original asset in the game. Then you can go to add stuff to it. Now, this function here, add sprite to object, I modified this to accept this game object in this context, because usually the original item API code that this is taken from expects that this is a fake prefab, but it's not. It's an actual prefab in an asset bundle. And so I had to create a function to prevent it from trying to fake prefab it, because you don't need to fake prefab any of the asset bundle stuff you load from your asset bundle. That's one of the benefits. Okay. Anyway, that should cover how you would reference it here. And the textures is the same thing. You load them as texture 2D objects. I think I do that here. Let's see. Anyway, yeah, that covers how you load it. Once you have it set up in your mod, and you have the usually, assets should also show where the asset bundle will be in your mod. This is my mod as an extracted folder because it's easier to change it when it's not in a zip file like this. See, my expand shared auto is right here, and that's where you put it once you build your asset bundle. And did I actually build the asset bundle in the editor? So I'll show you how to do that. Not this one though, not the example. Here we go. Assets, build asset. And it'll do its thing, create a new folder called asset bundles. Now, once that folder exists, you can go to it like that. And there it is right here, example asset bundle, matching the name that you gave earlier. And then you would copy this into your mod like this, like that, for example, and then you reference it in your code. And that's how you set up asset bundle, and that's how you create prefabs.